Deserts are defined by their absence of water. Wind Waker's water is iconic. So iconic, many aspiring artists have tried to replicate its look in their own projects, sometimes building on the effect, other times making a crude imitation that doesn't quite live up to the original. So in this video, I'm going to go over all the technical aspects of how The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker renders its water. This foam is the poster child of Wind Waker water. It appears in the most open sections of the Great Sea. Anytime you're near one of the major islands, the water calms down so the coast can be consistent. You might wonder what I could possibly talk about with such a simple material, but it actually comprises 3 different layers. If we look into the game's files, we find this, a grayscale version of our beloved ocean foam. Obviously, some processing needs to be done before it's rendered to the screen. A grayscale image consists of pixels ranging from black to white, but these so-called colors are really just numbers. In the case of our ocean foam texture, it's stored as a 4-bit image, meaning there's 16 different values a pixel can have. While it's typically displayed as 0 being black and 15 being white, we can use these numbers to represent any color we want. In-game, these colors are picked at runtime from a predefined palette which changes based on the weather and time of day. But for the sake of this video, let's set 0 to be blue, and 15 to be a darker blue to get the shadows. Then take this same texture and scale it down to get the foam. Layering the 2 textures can be done by displaying only the pixels that have the higher value. This blending mode is called lighten. The movement is achieved using a second texture called a displacement map, which alters the final texel positions relative to the originals. The term texel stands for texture pixel, and refers to the pixels of the original image before it's mapped onto a mesh. Where the displacement map is black, the texels get pushed down and to the left, and where it's white, they get pushed up and to the right. To get motion out of this, all we have to do is scroll it and the texture wibbles around. Our top foam texture being smaller than our displacement map texture helps reduce repetition, as the tiled section of the foam now wibbles differently depending on the tiling of the displacement map. The final aspect, while not another texture layer, is MIP mapping. MIP maps are lower resolution versions of a texture that are used when it takes up a small number of pixels on the display, due to it being far away or at a steep angle. Most textures just have automatically generated MIP maps to reduce moire patterns and increase rendering speed. In this case, however, they are used to fade the foam pattern out after a certain distance. The higher bitmap levels, which are the lower resolution textures, darken the foam until it's entirely black. This effect is resolution dependent, however, which is why in the Wii U remaster you can see the foam continue much further away from the camera. And that's it, we have our final ocean material. If you're curious about the 3D waves and how they're created using sine waves and vertex manipulation, well, too bad. We can see the next couple of water effects on Forest Haven Island. The first thing you might notice is this foam and shadow that go all the way around the island. Some of the smaller islands don't use these textures, and they look much less grounded as a result. Greatfish Isle stands out in particular as despite using the choppy ocean material, the water is flat. Even during a storm, it remains eerily still. The beach is also missing the beautiful wave material you find on Outset Island, but that's spoilers, I'll get back to that in 3 minutes. Both of these island grounding effects are just 2 textures scrolling in opposite directions. The foam grows and shrinks over time by changing its UV coordinates. UV mapping is the process of projecting a 3D model surface onto a 2D surface so you can apply an image to it. The letters U and V stand for horizontal and vertical. In this case, because we're already starting with a flat surface, we just treat it as a string of rectangles. All we need to do is move the coordinates of the top 2 corners of each face up and down in a cycle. The keen-brained among you might wonder how this water effect wraps seamlessly around the island, seeing as we have to cut a seam in the UVs in order to straighten it out. Well, we have a few options for that. Since the texture repeats, we could line up the UVs and effectively remove the seam altogether. But the quick and easy way would be to just tuck the seam in a corner so it's harder to notice. Or we could just leave the seam in plain view in a high traffic area next to the entrance of the island where the waterfall dumps you out at. As you may have been able to tell from the specificity of that last option, that's the one the developers chose. They managed to line up the UVs on the Nintendo Gallery Island, so I don't know what happened here. Moving on to the rivers, this material doesn't use any new techniques, so I'll quickly go through all the layers. 2 foam layers run alongside the river at different scales, curving up the walls for a 3D appearance. The center of the river has these wiggly shadows that also scroll. There's some really bad seams on these though, so I wouldn't look at them too long. The most interesting part of the river is these islands in the middle where the side foam splits up and comes back together. They actually lined up the UV coordinates so there wasn't a seam at these 2 points. Instead we just get this mirrored effect. The final water effect we can find here is the waterfalls. The middle of the waterfall shares the same materials as the river, but the crest has these triangles that seem to bob up and down. This is actually just 2 scrolling textures again, but using a new blending mode we haven't seen before. Only the pixels which are darkest between the 2 textures are displayed. This blending mode is known as darken. Then we treat this new texture as an alpha mask and display the black pixels as transparent, leaving the visible parts white. The last effect we're going to look at here is the ripples at the base of the waterfall. though we can get a much better view inside the forest haven. At first glance, it doesn't look like a texture at all. It's too sharp, almost looks polygonal. But as you may have already guessed, it's just another scrolling texture. It just scrolls from an infinitely small point in the center out to the edges, causing each ripple to grow and slow down as it reaches the edge. There's a second layer that moves at a different speed. This time the pixels are added together in a blending mode aptly called additive. Then, any pixels that are less than half brightness are made fully transparent. The lack of any transition between opaque and transparent is what makes the texture look so sharp. You can see the effect just doesn't work at all if I turn off the alpha clipping. The reason the texture fades out towards the edge of the mesh is because there's an alpha value being stored in the vertices. The final material we're going to look at can actually be seen at the start of the game. It uses a total of 9 layers to reach our final effect. I'll start with this simple scrolling texture, which makes these crashing waves along the shoreline. There's 2 textures that scroll past one another horizontally as usual, and they crash along the shore with another simple vertical scroll. They fade in the same way as the ripple texture from before fades out. The vertices have an alpha value. They also fade the waves out along the edges where they end. You can see they had trouble combining the island's shadow with the waves. The next layers all move back and forth rather than scrolling continuously. This first layer is nothing we haven't seen before, just some light colored foam that honestly I'd never noticed before making this video. It's a really subtle effect. Next there's the foam that's present at all times, but most noticeable during the ebb when the crashing waves don't cover it up. It utilizes the same texture as those waves, but employs a darken blending mode instead of lighten, giving this receding foam a more airy appearance. The final layer is this shadow that lags behind the rest of the wave. It's just pitch black in color, but contributes to the alpha layer to give it shape. It's also used to make the sand look wet from the wave that's just crashed on the shore. And that's our last water effect. If there's anything you think I missed, let me know down in the comments and I'll probably pin an explanation.